So in my previous talk, I discussed why I think my public issue is important and why I think that it affects everybody in general. In this talk, I'll be discussing three major misconceptions that I found in researching this public issue and why I think that they are misconceptions. The first misconception I'll be addressing is that certain ideas are demonstrably false. The second is that certain ideas can radicalize students if irresponsibly shown. The third is that hate speech can be damaging to the groups that the speech is directed towards. Each of these issues and the counterpoints that I give to them will help illustrate my position on public speaking on college campuses and how I came to conclude that because free speech is being limited on college campuses, I think that we should disavow that behavior socially. It is important that we address each issue regardless of how true or how false it is with the same level of maturity that we would anything else. Which brings me to my first point, the idea that certain issues are demonstrably false. This may be true that some ideas are demonstrably false, such as Nazi ideology, USSR ideology, or Confederate Southern ideology. However, I think it's dangerous to regulate certain ideas based on whether or not they're true or how much we like them. For instance, if we regulate USSR ideology, who's to say that we don't regulate socialist ideology or even social democrat ideology? Or on the flip side, if we regulate fascist ideology, who's to say we don't take it one step further and begin to regulate all authoritarian ideology or even just moderate ideologies to take it to an extreme? Another big problem with this issue is that often people decide which one is false and which one should be regulated based on bias arguments. An example of a bias that we find in academia is in an article by USA Today, where a group of 3 writers in the year of 2018 published a group of false articles with no scientific roots and no legitimate results. One such article that was particularly outlandish was about dog parks and a quote-unquote rape culture that was occurring between dogs that based on fur color. The article was totally fabricated and had no truth whatsoever to it, but yet a respected academic journal published it anyway because of the political nature of the article's findings. Now, this is a radical finding that the conclusion that the article came to, and it was passed anyway because of the certain narrative it fit. The radical nature of this brings me to my next point, which is that students will be radicalized by these ideologies. It is true that it is necessary that we responsibly platform certain ideas to prevent them from running rampant on college campuses, but banning the speech, it might exacerbate the problem. In a Washington Post article, a psychologist, Krugalinsky, named 3 points that are the main reason people get radicalized by certain ideologies. The first point he listed was the worldview of living an idealistic life. For most people in regular society, this is being a family person, having a good job, or achieving some kind of happiness, fulfillment. For a radical person, this is often rooted in identity, such as race, gender, or religion. The irony of this first point is that the people who are most in opposition to certain radical ideas often roots their opposition in some sort of identity. The second point is that there is a narrative that is set by the radical ideology, a narrative that the ideology is oppressed and being actively silenced by regular society. Now, obviously, this being true, it wouldn't make any sense to silence these ideologies or try to stop them from being espoused, because it would only give credence to that narrative and allow them to believe themselves to be the victims of some sort of conspiracy. The third and final point that he outlines is that there is a certain community that is formed, or a network between people of similar ideology. This often occurs from social isolation, because their ideas are so unpopular, they get pushed into a corner of the internet or a corner of public forums and are free to discuss without being impeded their ideas, because no one is willing to contend with them, since they are discredited upon viewing. Each of these points illustrates how that there is an inherent problem with pushing away radical ideologies because of the danger within them, rather than addressing them maturely. The third and final one is hate speech that can occur to those targeted. It can damage them. Words can potentially damage groups targeted by this hate speech. The problem with hate speech is multifaceted, but I think the best example of why we shouldn't legislate it specifically comes from the Supreme Court. In 2011, Justice John Roberts ruled that the government or any legislative body should not regulate hate speech, because there is an inevitable danger that certain political dissent will be silenced as well. On top of that, there is two major issues that I find in hate speech. The first issue is that the definition is very loose, very arbitrary. It can be applied fairly broadly to many ideas if someone finds that idea to make them uncomfortable, or to be threatening, or to be a quote-unquote dog whistle. The second biggest problem is that there is a definition for certain speech that isn't speech, but hate speech is outside of that. What I mean is, in the Constitution, it is outlined that fighting words are not protected speech. For instance, yelling fire in a crowded theater. But this does not necessarily regulate direct speech. I believe personally that the idea behind fighting words is not that you're not allowed to say fire in a crowded theater. It's the idea that saying fire in a crowded theater causes people to panic, which puts people in a position of danger. Threatening someone's life causes them panic and stress, and puts them in a compromised position. Not necessarily the words you're saying are being prosecuted, but the effects of the words you're saying. Hate speech is different, because it attempts to prosecute the direct words regardless of their effects, which I find to be fundamentally problematic, because whereas fighting words legislation prosecutes the direct results of your words, hate speech would try to prosecute just what you're saying based on its own merits. I think that this is fundamentally flawed and could lead to disastrous consequences. The point of all of these ideas, all of these counterpoints, is to say that ideas should be freely expressed, and to say on top of that, that ideas can be freely expressed without being damaging to society. If we're responsible with the ways we platform ideas that are unpopular or uncomfortable, we can address them without causing any harm to people that may be affected. For instance, flat earthers. We don't stop flat earthers from being allowed in public forums, because we debate them. We don't just let them go out and say whatever they want. We acknowledge their beliefs and we address them maturely. The most important thing to remember is that we must leave behind our bias and approach uncomfortable conversations that most people have an adverse reaction to in a mature way, where we detach ourselves from the identity that we take solace in, and we confront the idea and not the person, and treat them not as the ideology that they're espousing, but as somebody who is simply giving us an argument to contend with.